All right, folks, it's noon, so we'll kick off our e-learning event today. Welcome. My name is Amanda Demmer, and I'm the Learning Specialist and Program Coordinator for Community Based Research Canada, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Today, we're very excited. This is our third session in an e-learning event that's part of our series on community-based research responding to crises. And specifically, we have a sub-theme right now where we're looking at how community-based research responds to crises in health, wellness, and social inequity. So very excited to have two wonderful speakers speaking today, Dr. Tanvir Chowdhury and Francis Boakye, on the topic of exploring the dynamicity of racialized and immigrant community health literacy needs, learning with the community. For those who aren't familiar with us at CBPR Canada, our secretariat is located in what's known as Waterloo, Ontario, situated on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We are a membership-based organization with a mission of advancing community-based research excellence in Canada by strengthening partnerships, building capacity, mobilizing knowledge, and championing community-based research among individuals, communities, and institutions. We are a social enterprise. We're funded entirely by our membership base of currently over 80 organizational and institutional members. And as part of the programming we provide to our members, we host events like these e-learning events, as well as a community of practice that we host monthly. You can find more information on our upcoming events, as well as recordings of past events and other resources on our website. And my colleague Rose will post that in the chat now. In the spirit of reconciliation and recognizing the role that we can play in terms of continually reflecting between the interconnectedness of truth and reconciliation and the various topics we approach using community-based research, we open each of our e-learning events by amplifying the calls of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action. So this week or this month, I've chosen call to action number 24 to highlight today, which calls that we call upon medical and nursing schools in Canada to require all students to take a course dealing with Aboriginal health issues, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties in Aboriginal rights, and Indigenous teachings and practices. This will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. Since today we're speaking about health needs and health literacy of different racialized and immigrant communities, I thought it would be relevant to highlight this call to action, which speaks to the health needs of Indigenous communities in Canada as well. So our agenda today, I'll be passing it over very shortly to our two presenters for their presentation today. We'll hear from them for about a 30-minute long presentation and have about 20 minutes left for question and answer at the end. So some housekeeping items. The event today is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the recording or send the recording out to your peers who weren't able to make it after the event today. We will ask folks to leave their microphones off during the presentation, but you're welcome to have your cameras on if you'd like. It's always nice to present to faces instead of blank screens. When we get to the question and answer period, we certainly welcome you to turn your cameras on and to enter questions in the chat box. So I encourage you to enter your questions into the chat box at any time throughout the presentation today. We'll address them when we get to the question and answer, but if a question pops into your head during the presentation and you'd like to put it in the chat box, please do so at any time. And then when we get to the question and answer period, I'll take a scan through to see if any questions have come in, and we'll start with those. We'll have a very brief closing, letting you know about some other upcoming events before we say goodbye after our question and answer period is up. So without further ado, I'm very honored to be introducing and passing things over to our two presenters. So Dr. Turin Tanvir Chowdhury is an associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Department of Community Health Studies in the Cumming School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. His current research work includes equitable access to healthcare and reducing the unmet health needs faced by the newcomer communities in Canada. He leads his program of research through the approach of community-based participatory research and integrated knowledge translation, where meaningful community engagement is at the core. This approach not only enhances the relevance and impact of his work, but also embodies principles of social justice by actively involving marginalized communities in the research process. Incorporating elements of social accountability, Dr. Turin's work strives to elevate the perspectives of racialized and immigrant communities by ensuring their voices are integral to health research and policy development. And co-presenting is Frances Boakye, the Executive Director of Action Dignity Society in Calgary. Prior to assuming this position, Frances was the Vice President for Strategy and Outreach at the Center for Newcomers for 11 years and has nearly 20 years of experience in the settlement and service sector. In addition to his work in this sector, Frances is also a passionate instructor and has been engaged in teaching and teaching assignments at the social work faculty since 2008. He was the Calgary Research Coordinator for the National Research Project on Racism, Violence, and Health of Black Men from 2005 to 2008. Frances has volunteered and continues to serve as a volunteer in many positions, including serving as the co-chair of both the Calgary Anti-Racism Action Committee and co-chair of the CLIP's Anti-Racism Action Team. Other volunteer positions have included serving on several boards and committees locally and nationally. He's currently also a board member of the National Foundation for Black Communities. So two very talented and knowledgeable presenters here to share with us today that I'm very honored to pass things over to. So we'll have a little bit of a transition here as I end my screen share. And Turin, you can share your screen now. Wonderful. You are currently on mute. There we go.
Okay, so 4 years in June, but nothing changed. So thanks, Amanda, CBR Canada, for this opportunity to share our work with the extended audience. And thanks, Frances, Dr. Boakye, for being the dancing partner with me all along. Okay, so as you know, we will be sharing our work experience regarding the health literacy, especially then within the newcomer communities. So for that, I think the first thing that we would like to position ourselves. So probably we are, Francis and me, we live in Calgary. Our work and play and is in the traditional territories of Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations. The Tsuut'ina, the Isiha, Nakoda nations, whose are Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney. The Optimiswak, Metis, Government District 5 and 6, and all the people who makes their homes in the Treaty of 7 region of Southern Alberta. And we are very much committed to this equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility issues. And we are committed to eliminating racism and oppression of any shape, kind, and forms. So our work is mainly focused on immigrant and refugee populations in Canada. So we know that a huge Canada has a rich history of immigration, and that diversity started taking place during the 1970s when the Canadian government opened up for multiracial immigration rather than only Anglo-racial immigration. Focus on that, and then with time, I think now in Canada, the newcomer communities, the visible minority communities are a very strong contributor to the Canadian mosaic. It's 26% of the workers are immigrants. We have a huge number of self-employed immigrants, a ever-growing number of the small businesses that immigrants and newcomers, they try to do. So, Canada has a strong presence of diversity, which leads to the question of, what we will be doing for the inclusion and making life better for everybody. So just to, make few definitions in a little bit of clear. So, what do I mean by immigrants or newcomers? They are permanent residents or Canadian citizens by naturalizations. They are also called immigrants. There is a huge number of international students and temporary foreign workers. They are non-permanent residents. They also come here, so they also fell in the section of newcomers, depending on the activities or policies or issues we are dealing with. And altogether, a visible minority, that's a focus of ours, that's we focus as well, is this is defined by Government of Canada as persons other than Aboriginal people who are non-Caucasian race and non-white in color. So these are the places we normally work, and we try to focus our research and community activities. And within that, today we are talking about health and wellness. So as you know, that health and wellness is not only by disease, it's about being well. And so many different aspects of being well are there, which goes beyond the School of Medicine or faculty of, or those faculties of serving people like social work or sociology. It's more of the wellness in broader term. Now, within that, as we focus on health literacy, I think I would start with setting up with a definition. This is the definition I like. The ability of the individuals to obtain, interpret, and understand basic health information and services. And this is very important, use such information and services in the ways that enhance health. I think this is a very important concept. Like health literacy is the ability, but ability of what? Obtain, interpret, understand about information and services, and also use such information. So based on this definition, our works have been evolving and moving forward. Now we know, like similar to all other major urban areas in Canada, also we have a condensation of newcomers mainly due to the feasibility of living, mainly due to the availability of work and those type of things. Now, with this multiculturalism, everybody brings their own culture in their backpack, right? And when they bring their own culture in backpack, we are most of the time, a lot of time, not that much aware of this host countries' regulations and customs in terms of health awareness and healthcare system. And again, I think we come here, me included, we come here and we start learning about those. Uh, but despite learning about those, we have seen people facing difficulty in navigating services, understanding how to utilize services in a proper way. And also there are system side barriers that they put in place, or those that are in place, in terms of not accommodating the newcomer needs optimally. So based on these components, I think I will hand it to Dr. Francis Boakye to, talk about a beautiful program they have been doing on the mental health side for the newcomer population. Francis, to you, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chowdhury, and then Amanda and Rose. Turin and I and Action Dignity have been doing some of this work. We've been working very closely with Turin. And so based on what he has kind of contextualized, in 2022, Action Dignity worked with the communities in Calgary here to really understand their perception of mental health. So the next slide, we are looking at the overall goal of that project. It was a community-based action research project. And I think the idea was because so many people were struggling to really grapple with the after effects of COVID. And so the goal here was to develop a framework for social inclusion with respect to mental health and racialized people. And so as you can see the objectives, the first objective was really to understand perceptions of mental health among racialized people, because people have their own ideas about how we think about mental health. So this research was to help us really enhance knowledge in that area. And then to identify the gaps and challenges that exist in the mental health care system. This is very, very important because we are looking at the healthcare system and the gaps that exist. So we are looking at services and how services are provided. Then the last one, which is also very important, was to really map out the context-specific community practices that are identified as effective. And in the next slide, we'll see the process of the research, how it happened. So again, it was a community-based research. It was located in the northeast quadrant of Calgary, where we have lots of newcomers residing. And so we identified 7 population ethnic groups. So we had the Chinese, we had the Filipino, the Ethiopian, the South Sudanese, South Asian, and Vietnamese. And why did we identify these individuals? Because we had lots of concerns of mental health coming from these ethnic groups. And so the idea came from them, the focus was on them, and the research process was with them. We had 5 to 7 people in focus group discussions. Again, Action Dignity uses what we call community connectors. So we have people in the communities embedded in the community who were part of the research, right from identifying the issue to analyzing the research findings, the data. So we had 5 to 7 participants per group. And then this was facilitated by a very well trained facilitator in the process. And this was done by Zoom because we didn't have, COVID had kind of, put all of us in our various homes and offices. So that was what happened. And then the data was encoded, thematic analysis was done. And then finally, we came out with some very concrete themes that came from the research discussions. So in the next slide, we'll see the relationship between some of the findings that came up, which may not be very surprising to you. Racism, mental health, and social exclusion are inextricably linked. These are very well connected together. There were also some varying perceptions of mental health with a strong stigma associating mental health with mental illness. Lots of our participants, who were about 45, between the ages of 25 and then 69, most of them talked about mental health and confused that with mental illness. And so for them, from their cultures, like, somebody is mentally ill, and so that for them is mental health. That is how the interpretation was from their perspectives. So they couldn't differentiate. They didn't see, they saw the two as one: mental health, mental illness. So that was very, very strong in the research. And then there were also varying cultural definitions of and experiences of social exclusion. People saw social exclusion as from different angles, from their perspectives. And sometimes it was really the fact that even within their own communities, they felt socially excluded. Sometimes it was because of barriers to accessing services. And those were all parts of some of the themes that came up from the research. And then a big one was inequitable access to mental health services. I think this was very, very big from the researchers' perspective. We call them researchers as well, they're co-researchers in that sense. And so we are looking at some of these pieces, and then we are trying to understand how this translates into actions. So in the next slide, we show the relationship between all these pieces. So racism, mental health issues, intersection of inequalities. So gender, race, age, education, level of income, sexual orientation, all those intersections added up and then coupled with racism were part of the reasons why there was mental health, and then bigger circle, the social exclusion that people faced. And these are very foundational because they really tell a story of the relationship between racism, mental health issues, intersections of inequalities, and then social exclusion. Social exclusion has many dimensions to it. Next slide, please. So how did the research result in change? This is an important part of community-based action research. We are talking about action that ensued after the research. And so if you look at bullet point 2, the research informed work on integrating racial trauma in the definition and toolkit of trauma-informed care. This was an important component of why we did the research, because currently racial trauma is not very recognized as part of factors contributing to mental health. So this particular research resulted in Action Dignity and the University of Calgary, really looking at how can we begin to look at incorporating racial trauma as part of how we practice, doing analysis or diagnosis or assessments based on that experience of racism and the ensuing trauma that follows. And then it also helped us to shape the anti-racism learning journey of mental health therapists. We had 12 therapists in the community who were all white, working with racialized youth, and this was predominantly Black youth. And in the end, the results of transformation was phenomenal. Most or all of the therapists began to understand how very, very little knowledgeable they were when it came to racism and mental health. And they understood how Black youth really faced racism, and that changed their practices moving forward. So those actions were very, very important. We also built on a Vietnamese engagement team that was really open to talking about racism and mental health, because this was not very common with their communities. And then the Filipino group, they have facilitated an intergenerational understanding between youth, parents, grandparents, and then it has led to the creation of a multi-sectorial working group to address mental health. These are all working with Action Dignity. These groups are working with us to create a long-term action that is reflective of the results of the research. And then the Ethiopian community also created a Black Mental Health Matters program that was funded partly by one of the funders here and supported by Action Dignity. So these changes ensued as a result of the research that was done. Next slide, please. And then what did we learn? You know, Habermas talks about two types of worlds in research. One of them is the life world and the systems world. This research was concentrated on the life world. People with lived and living experiences of mental health. They helped design the research process. They helped design the solutions. And the research had a social justice ethic to it because of the processes that followed. And then the issue of empowerment came up. We learned about how most of the participants and their communities had opportunities to share their experiences with mental health workers. That action was very, very empowering for people who have never had opportunity to really do that. Next slide. And then another piece of learning was advocacy at the self level and then group level. We have lots of our community partners, including some of the actions I talked about in the change piece, all beginning to advocate for changes in practices, changes in programming, and also clearing the way for equitable access to services. And then another piece was really on communicative action. Again, Habermas talks about instrumental action and communicative action in research. Communicative action is about the actions that bring understanding and collective will and solidarity. And we see that in this research, that we've come together as ethnocultural community groups, addressing mental health from actions that ensued from the research. And this is very, very important and part of the learning that we had in the research. And then two things that we avoided, two typical research errors that we avoided were questions that are not asked and results that are not wanted. This is very, very important because the questions, the process, the research came from the participants. It came from the community. And so the questions were relevant. And the findings are also relevant because we've seen the actions that are associated with the findings and how we are making changes as a result of a research from the community. Thank you. And I think I will hand it back to Dr. Chowdhury.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Boakye. Thank you, Francis. I think this has been a great example. I hope if, I can add on to that. So apart from what, this Action Dignity has been doing, and I was lucky to be part with it. So we had a little bit of bits and pieces research in the other communities. And again, just research component where regarding this, health literacy issues and what is it about, how to think about it. So this research resulted in definitely few publications, but I think at that time, through this research, the realizations that we started having, and then working with Action Dignity Francis, and the opportunity of bouncing ideas with them. So we started understanding like health literacy is not a it's not a static yes no or binary yes no type of thing. So if you think in the community, and if you go in the community, so if you think about these three things, like health literacy is about ability of obtain, interpret, and understand, and then use such information. So this is so important to break it down. We started realizing that traditionally we have been focusing heavily on obtain, and then no, we means me included, the system, we come up with translated materials culturally sensitive, we define those, and then we come up with materials and translate those, and then we throw it out of our 7th floor window, and then probably that's the point we just say that enough is done, or probably that's enough, people will pick that up on their own. But when we're working in the community, we found like in the community there are a group of people who don't know. There are another group of people who know, but they don't care. There is this third group of people who knows, cares, but they don't understand, in a new country, new context, what and how those things. There is another group of people who knows, who cares, who understand, but they don't have access to make those, that thing happen, that use thing happen. And there is another group of people who knows, cares, understand, can access once in a while through different, ad hoc supports, but they cannot apply those changes because health and wellness is a life in their life in a sustained way. So if you look at this, all these group of people, like, who know, care, understand, access, and apply, they are in different realm of, regarding health and wellness literacy. This is an issue of awareness. This is definitely an issue of motivation. This is a issue of, literacy. This is a issue of, making access once in a while happen. And again, this is ensuring the social determinants that then systemic and structural sort of barriers that hinder them from making their life healthy. So this is the way we thought. And another component was, though this is our, awareness and everything, but on the other hand, there is a dynamicity in a, perpendicular way as well. So those who are not aware, if we do our lots of effort to make them aware, they just move to the next level. Maybe they don't understand, maybe they don't care, and maybe they don't have access. So this dynamicity of moving people, if we solve one level of problem and then move to the next one, or the next one, these all need to be understood and captured and used in the implementation plans that we have. So based on that, we wrote a sort of a policy brief to make this issue aware to everybody. The barcode will take you to the policy brief, and I will share the brief with CBR Canada for you to share with the audience as well. But the thing is, like, we are telling, like, people are in different levels, number one point, and people move to different level if the previous level has been taken care of. So this dynamicity need to be captured, need to be understood, and programs in different levels need to be, compiled together, interconnected programs, so that we can serve maximally to the people that we are trying to serve, and we are trying to improve the health. I think I will ask Francis to connect this way of thinking with the example that he showed as a last point that we would like to make with to you guys.
Thank you very much, Turin. And that's a very powerful dynamicity model that we see here. Issue to overcome awareness. And then we see people who don't know. So in the research that was done, like I said earlier, there were people who were in a state of confusion when it came to mental health. And so you see the connection here. So the research was part of overcoming an awareness issue and within the context of a new country that people find themselves. And then there were people who didn't know, or people who knew but didn't care. And not that they didn't care, like, oh, I don't mind, but because they know something, but again, they needed to be motivated in that sense. And so we had this connection in the research where people were motivated, and the motivation led to learning because they care, they know they care, but now they are understanding the context of mental health in a new setting, as I described earlier. And then I talked about the issue of accessibility, the fact that the research led to the transformation of 12 therapies in terms of how youth can access mental health equitably without barriers, without systemic barriers. I think that was very, very important. And now there is potentially, from what we are doing from the action perspective, getting people to apply the knowledge that they have acquired through the research. And those were the actions I mentioned earlier. People now beginning to understand that, oh, we can now act, whether it is actually acting to advocate on our health or working to really make sure that practitioners are doing the right things and that there's access to services and that policies are being shaped or reshaped to accommodate the social health determinants of people. Language is a determinant of health. Race is a determinant of health. And all these pieces came together from that angle. So if you look at this model, you really see that the research did touch on almost every issue that was to be overcome. And we are still in the process when it comes to the application. I think Turin talked about knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization pieces. And we are doing this with Turin and his team, working on educating the public, doing community-based mobilization, knowledge mobilization events, just to get this information out and then to encourage people to act on what they need to act on because of new information and knowledge that they have acquired. So the dynamicity here is very powerful. And I really like this model because it really kind of shows how we can address some of these things bit by bit, but also collectively in a research fashion. Thank you. And we are in for questions at this point, I think.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear more about this project. And I was really excited, for this presentation, this conversation, after hearing a little bit about the project, both what you were able to achieve in terms of findings, but also what you were able to achieve in terms of action, really directly coming from this project was extremely impressive. So at this point, we're in the question and answer period. So I encourage folks to ask their questions by entering them within the chat box. I'll then read the questions off to our presenters to answer and to address. I haven't seen any questions coming in so far, so please take some time and enter any questions you have in the chat. But in the meantime, to get things started, I had a question. Just, I'm so impressed with all of the action that came from this project. You spoke about these different communities who started up initiatives based on the findings of this research. And you spoke a little bit about, the processes of how you really implemented community-based and participatory projects or processes within your project. But I'm wondering if you can speak more directly to maybe one or two examples or maybe key things that you think helped make the actions from this successful. So what were the things that you did within the research process that you think made it so easy and successful for some of those actions to come about after the project?
Thank you very much, Amanda. Turin, come in. So the first piece, Amanda, was the fact that this was an issue that was coming from the community. Mm-hmm. So it's a very strong connection between the issue and the population group that was interested in really making sure that this is something that we address. Secondly, like I said, it was within the geographic location of Calgary, the northeast quadrant of Calgary, where mostly racialized people live. Mm-hmm. And so it was a question of identity to an issue. And then they understood that there was need for us to really create a process that was meaningful, a process that was going to create actions, and actions that they themselves were going to lead. So those factors were critical because they haven't been able to enjoy such a research process where they were in charge. So this is why I talked about a social justice research ethic. So Rich. And Turin has been doing lots of this work with us in terms of community-based or community-engaged research. And so this was very fundamentally very different and very powerful.
Yeah.
Now you look at the different ethnic groups, 7 coming together on a shared issue, mental health, and then to share the experiences of how mental health, how they understood it, and how they understand it now, and the corresponding actions that are needed to really help us overcome some of those pieces around the dynamicity model. So this for us were important. And then the last piece of it was the fact that after all this was done, the actions that ensued, the solutions that came up, came from them. And they took ownership of the solutions. So they went out there with support from funders and began to implement some of the solutions that came up. So all these groups I mentioned, the Filipino group, the Chinese group, the Vietnamese group, the Black youth, all these are actions that are currently going on, and they are transforming lives. That's the beauty of it.
That's so neat to hear about it. It really, I think, highlights the point that we try to get across in a lot of our trainings about community-based research, which is the more you engage, folks with lived experience and also folks who have the power to take action on an issue directly within a research process, the more, buy-in that they'll have, the more power that they'll feel to be able to enact that change, the more, they feel engaged and want to take that initiative at the end of a project. Because you're allowing that kind of self-determination throughout the research process. Is there anything, Dr. Chowdhury, you'd add to that?
No, I think Francis summarized this aspectly. Nothing to add here.
Beautifully. Okay. I think this is kind of a somewhat related question, the first one I see in the chat here. What role did people with lived experience play in designing the research as well as the solutions? So I think you spoke a little bit to the solutions part there. So perhaps speaking a bit more to that research side of things, what role did community members, folks with lived experience play in designing the research?
So just overall, the way we do research is, so I think, just a context, like before 2014, I was a number cruncher, crunching numbers in my laptop, and which is engraved in the cubicle of the 3rd floor of my schools, that I was getting it. But 2014, something happened. Probably I got a divine intervention and moved to, doing this community-based research side. I think one thing that Francis already exemplified in their work, like the questions of the communities were coming. So here, a few interesting realization came to me. Amanda, I will put you in the spot. Okay, so assume that after this successful event today, this weekend, there is a dance party, arranged by CBPR Canada, and I'm assuming that you are a good dancer, and you invited me to be part of the dance. Now what happens? I'm a very bad dancer. Your experience will be horrible. But on the other hand, if you take few hours tomorrow morning and teach me the basics of dancing, your dancing experience will be far, far better. And my experience will be also better. I think we try to move towards involving people with lived experience, where we also take the responsibility of showing them or making that or exposing them what research means, how the research steps goes, what will be the nice steps for the dance that we would like to do together. So beyond involving them and to the commitment of going beyond tokenism, we take those, and I have seen Francis and us, we have been talking about it, we have been committed to it, make people more research aware, research process aware, research methods aware, so that we can dance better than this one. So apart from there being contributing, as Francis told, about this, the questions were coming from the community, but we took the responsibility, and because I want to have a better experience in dancing, research dancing. So it's my responsibility, my commitment, so that my partner would be a little bit, I can make sure I can, show those techniques and this one to partner so that we can do this one. And this goes all the way of, initial conversation of discussing the research idea and, explaining and discussing what the methods will be taken, getting them involved in the in the research analysis piece.
Mhm.
And depending on their desire, do they want a very hands-on type of involvement? Do they want to but the more they want to get deep involvement, more we make sure that they understand the needs of the learning the dancing, and we are
Mhm.
committed to teach those things. So
Mhm.
that's the aspect I will just bring up in answer to the questions regarding involving people with lived experience.
Mhm. I think that's such a beautiful analogy and such a great way to put it, really emphasizing that point that to do community-based research well, there has to be capacity building embedded within that, or capacity bridging, we often say, right? Because we're learning from the community just as much as they're learning from us. But it's this co-learning process of, equipping community members with the skills that they need to meaningfully engage in a research process, engage in that dance, as you've said. I think that's a really great way for all of us to think about, what meaningful and authentic engagement looks like of community members. Mhm. I see the next question coming in here is asking you to talk a little bit more about how you work to address barriers in motivation related to health literacy. So kind of a big question in terms of the behavior change and motivation field. Is there any
So
findings from your project? Mhm.
definitely, Francis has a lot of things to say. I just wanted to say one thing before Francis jumps in. Thanks for this great question. In my personal experience and the research experience, this we call it taboo or mental stigma, or even that goes against this so-called how to call it, what is a good word for it, like macho appearance of
Mhm.
especially the male, that we cannot show people that we are mentally affected with all those integration pressure and whatever is happening around us in the world. So, I think our initial conversation was we knew that motivation is needed. But
Mhm.
again, motivation, if we start talking about mental health and the moment M comes out, people disperse. Like, "Hey, come on, that's not for me. You are making me look weak."
Mhm.
So this, we then we are saying that we change the conversation model, and again, it was in nearly 5-7 years back that we are working on. Yes, you are macho, man, so strong, standing, holding tight, but that takes some toll on you
Mhm.
because that takes some. So that was the inner way of going in,
Mhm.
and that's the I'm talking about the larger community. But again, Francis, if you based on this mental wellness project, I think you will have a lot of things to say in this area. So for us, the motivation was to normalize, to
Mhm.
simplify, to make it a thing that this can be talked about.
Mhm. Mhm.
That was the barrier of motivation to break in.
Mhm.
So Francis, your experience, please.
No, I think you nailed it, Turin. I think the motivation was exactly what Turin has described. In addition to that, people love their families. And this impacts, mental health impact was affecting families.
Mhm.
People did not have control over what was happening. Coming to a new country, so many different things, structural barriers, structures and systemic racism. People are facing all kinds of things, and they unleash some of these things on their families. And they love their families. So there was this motivation to say, what can we do? Like
Mhm.
the Vietnamese community, for instance, we have the Vietnamese men group and the Filipino men group who come together to really talk about some of these things, heart to heart. What we are not bad people. We are not,
Mhm.
wicked people. There's something happening to us, and we need to talk about them. So that was a very powerful motivation. And if you look at the dynamicity model, you realize that yes, they know, they care,
Mhm.
and then they really wanted to begin to care more and to learn more and to find solutions in that
Mhm.
sense. So these things came together in that fashion. So the motivation was very strong. And the fact that we
Mhm.
looked at a certain geographic quadrant of Calgary, which is largely populated by racialized people, low income groups, and things like that, I think that was a very strong foundational motivation for them.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really interesting. So I'm hearing that, um, it was really about, shifting those beliefs and attitudes first and foremost, reducing those stigmas so that, and kind of reframing the issue to help with that motivation. But I'm also hearing it was kind of playing on the collectivism of certain communities, playing on that sense of care for the collective, for the family, instead of playing on, the individual, and why it's important for you to think about mental illness, but why it's important for your family. So that's really interesting, a way of kind of reframing it to help shift those attitudes, and therefore the motivation.
So I just wanted to add one thing. I mean, the examples we gave are mainly from the side. From the women's side in our community, especially the immigrant communities, newcomer communities, from the women's side, it's not about the machoism, it's about not letting your family down.
Mm-hmm.
So that pressure, you are the last one to think about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a taboo to think about you going out and having a hangout with girls. I mean, I'm talking about the people that you hang around.
Mm-hmm.
No. How can I do that? My kids are here.
Mm-hmm.
So my family is here. So having those things
Mm-hmm.
being just being talked about probably. And again, it's not me motivating them.
Mm-hmm.
It's encouraging the way Francis said. The two groups of people came together. The
Mm-hmm.
women came together, and then that creates the self-motivation, because that just topples the
Mm-hmm.
boundary of talk about it or not.
Mm-hmm.
When they start talking about it, they all talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the solution just bursts out.
Mm-hmm.
And like what have we found? Innovation happens in the community. We have this, Department of Innovation, Department of this, Department of that. I wish, we just could be going to the community and capture the innovations, that we would not need to, break our heads in meetings to come up with, innovation.
Yeah.
We could have just picked it up and tried to make it better, or, just amplify those type of things, because our communities are so innovative, because
Mm-hmm.
survival is related to it. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
People will survive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's-
I love that. That's, I think a great role that community-based research can play is it can be kind of a funnel to collect and then amplify those solutions that come directly from community. So that's great. And yeah, I really like the way you're speaking about this. And I think there's likely some cultural nuances in there as well. North American culture, we tend to have more of individualistic mindsets. And I think some of those collectivist and family values aren't as strong. But when we look at some of those immigrant communities, those are very, very strong values in certain cultures. So particularly when that's relevant cultural values, that's a way to, address health literacy in a way that's culturally relevant and appropriate. And may not be for every culture, but for certain cultures, that's a great way of framing it. Mm-hmm.
Just to add, this collective culture sometimes affect negatively as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but the thing is, like what we found, and probably Francis will attest to that, just having the conversation, having a space to be courageous to conversation, I think that explains or addresses the motivation piece.
Right.
But once they break that barrier, they start working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to maybe, tie that into the research process as well. I mean, it sounds like throughout the research process, you allowed the opportunities for that, like built right into the research process to help again with the facilitation of the actions. So wonderful. So I'm seeing a couple other questions come in here. So one, I was curious how intersectional experiences may have been integrated or come through in lived experiences throughout the research process, and if you see any potential for this in future directions.
Yeah, so yeah, like we talked about intersections of inequalities, that was one aspect of intersections, intersection. And then the other part was intersections that is based on gender, age, income level, ethnicity, talking about even lived experiences. So all those intersections were very, very prominent. For instance, when we talk about intersection of inequalities, we are looking at the inequalities or inequities that exist amongst ethnic groups, and that is also divided or they intersect with different other factors. So for instance, we took the Chinese, the Vietnamese, we took the South Asians, the South Sudanese. Most of the South Sudanese young people really were part of the child soldiers. And so the trauma that they encountered in that setting, plus the racial trauma they are encountering here, intersected with other parts of their inability to even find jobs to do, and the fact that they can't even have access to anything, and the fact that they are in low-income families. So everything came together. They take the Filipino group, and they also had different intersections of inequalities. You take the Chinese group. Like, it was interesting to see how all these things came together. And so when we talk about social exclusion as a function of mental health, racism, and inequalities, that is what we meant. And you also understand the difference between, for instance, the younger people understood mental health differently from their parents. And that was a generational kind of difference. And this particular difference was important because it also led to some intergenerational education between parents, grandparents, and the young people to really see the nuances, the differences, and how they stretch over time. And then to use that as an opportunity for future learning in this kind of research. So it was very cool to really just see these things happen. Something that was also very powerful was the fact that the myth has always been that newcomers were afraid to talk about mental health, and that was where the discussion was about. But in the Canadian context, structural barriers were not talked about that much. So we contextualized everything. Oh, these guys don't want to talk about mental health. But when the space was given, they talked about mental health. But they also talked about structural barriers to accessing mental health services, including experiences of racism or everyday racism that was impacting their mental health as well. So these intersections were very, very prominent. They came out very well, and then they informed how these actions we took. So you saw the youth action that we took. You saw the men's group action, because they didn't want to talk about the macho part of it. So you saw how we distributed these actions based on some of the intersections that came up in the research.
Yeah, that really spoke to me when you were sharing about, the results from the research. Like, there's certainly, and I'm sure there's some common themes that weave its way through, all of the intersections, but there were also, there's cultural nuances and things between different identities and different layers, and each group was kind of able to take the initiative to do something for themselves in that way, in terms of solutions, instead of trying to generate one size fits all solution from the project. And you started to speak a little bit about intergenerational learnings there. So this is the last question we'll have time for. Similar and along the same lines, were there any intergenerational differences within communities in levels of health literacy or perceptions and experiences of mental health?
Yeah, so like I said in the response to the last question, the previous question, I think there were intergenerational differences. When you take, for instance, the Black Youth Project, and these were youth between the ages of 12 and 18. And it was very, very interesting to really listen to their experiences of mental health vis-a-vis the experiences of their parents. Of course, there was some consistency. There was something that connected all of them together. But for these young people who are born here, but who have a different skin tone, and the experience of racism, the experience of in the classrooms, in the streets, in accessing services, everything came together in that manner, to the extent that I tear up when I talk about this, because if you listen to their stories, it's just so powerful how they articulated their own experiences. And their parents may not be able to articulate them this way in terms of their own mental health situations. So that was very powerful. And then the narrative that they have given, and the fact that these narratives have been able to change practices of mental health therapists, who are mostly white therapists. So that is very powerful. Their parents may not speak English. Their parents may not be able to articulate them this way. Their parents may not be able to even have access to these services because they can't speak English. So that experience was very different for their parents. But the collective will and collective actions that ensued because of these groups who came together to take action in their own languages, and then to begin to look at their language as a strength, not as a weakness. They speak their own languages. So now let's focus on using our language to create actions. So some of the things we've done in Action Dignity, we've translated all these things into their languages, these 7 languages, so people can learn and be empowered and then be able to advocate for themselves based on these actions that they have done. So the older generation, the young generation, they speak English, they are taking different actions, but this is the learning that we are seeing. And we are going to do more, dig more into that as things unfold.
That's beautiful to hear about, you know, such impact that can be had kind of beyond the project and the different intergenerational experiences as well. Well, we're coming close to our time to wrap up. Are there any final comments either of you would like to share before we wrap up today?
I think one thing that from a researcher side, I would like to bring it up. And then again, this probably gives a little bit of answer to one question about the future directions or things that we talked about. So, you know, like if I look from the 10th floor and look down, everybody looks same. You know, I cannot distinguish, you know, white, black, and, you know, South Asian and others. If I come to the 5th floor, I understand, okay, these are the South Asian, brown, me, these are the people of different other larger groups. Now, research, you know, like, but on the ground floor, I understand everybody. Like, these are the, you know, South Asian Bangladeshi group, these are the South Sudanese group, the way Francis mentioned. I think we definitely need to have research and research implementation research or program development research done in the ground floor. But probably in terms of executing those Canada-wide or bigger range, we will not be able to do those in the ground floor execution, apart from the communities take those things on their own.
Right.
But from the system side, we need to go to the 5th floor at least, where we have, you know, a little bit of wider supporting programs that every community can take and, you know, make few modifications and implement within their own construct. So here is this, we have to have this public-private partnership in a sense, you know, with the communities and others, so that we can do those things. But definitely we should not be investing anything in terms of, you know, doing things from the 10th floor. So that's the thing. Research in the ground floor, definitely systems, policies, and everything influencing it for 5th floor, but with the tentacle with the ground floor, because it has to be the community and systems partnership.
That really speaks to me. And, you know, I'm a program evaluator by trade, and I do a lot of program evaluation work. And, you know, when we're implementing or evaluating programs, there needs to be, or there's usually this sense of, you know, what are those core components, that 5th floor level components of a program, but then what are those local adaptations that you need to do for each site of the program? And so I really like the way that you've put that. We are at the end of our time today, so we will wrap up very quickly here. It's been so lovely getting to have this conversation with the two of you and hearing about this project. I feel very honored that you were here to share with us today. For folks who would like to watch this recording or share this recording with others, it will be posted on our website, and my colleague Rose will put that link in the chat for folks to take a look at. We'll also send an email follow-up to everyone who is in this presentation. We'll have the recording as well as the slides and some of the links and resources that the presenter spoke about on our website as well. If you're not already on our e-newsletter, maybe someone sent you this event, sign up for our e-news to hear about any of our upcoming events in this series or other series. And lastly, we just wanted to make quick mention that our AGM, our annual general meeting, is coming up next week. So join us for that if you'd like to hear about our reflections on the past year and some wonderful keynote speakers we have as well. So my colleague Rose will put the link in the chat where you can find more information on the speakers and register for our AGM. So lastly, thank you so much everyone for being here today. Thank you to, of course, our wonderful presenters, but also everyone who joined us in the audience and those who asked questions throughout. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again in a month for our next event. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you for having us.